Shalom, it's Reuben Ebrahimoff, also known as the Haftorahman. This week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion is called Vayechi. And in it, Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, is on his deathbed. And he speaks to each one of his 12 sons. And he shares with them his last will and testament. So every week, there is a Haftarah, and they're thematically connected to the Parsha. There's always connection. So what did the men of the Great Assembly do? They picked this fantastic story about King David on his deathbed, transferring the leadership over to his son, none other than Shlomo. So, who is this man, King David? Where did he live? He lived in the city of Jerusalem. Where? In Ir David. If you visit Jerusalem today, you can actually see the palace of the king that is south of the Temple Mount. He lived about 3,000 years ago. His name, David, means beloved, my beloved one. We know he was a descendant of Ruth HaMoaviyah. His father's name, Yishai, David ben Yishai. Not many people know this, but his mother's name is mentioned in the Talmud, and it was Nitzevet bat Adael. Her name was Nitzevet. And David was a gingy. He was a redhead. He was a shepherd. That's how he made his living before he became king. Right around that time he became king. He killed Goliath, David and Goliath. He was a musician. And that musical harp that you see is referred to, and you could see it in the book of Tehillim, the book of Psalms, which globally is probably the most popular words that are used by monotheists to connect to God, to converse with God. So no man has put more words into my mouth and how to speak to God than King David. His best friend was Jonathan. And that he actually is the one who established Jerusalem as the capital city of the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel. And we also know about his son, King Solomon, who was the wisest man that ever lived, and he is the one who built the temple. We also say that the Mashiach is going to be a descendant of King Solomon. David. Mashiach ben David. So, there's one last thing I want to say about King David, and that is that after Shabbat, you have a Sabbath, there are 3 meals on Shabbat, but there's a 4th meal. It's called Sudat David. And why is that? I'll tell you why. David wanted to know when he was going to pass away, and he spoke with God, and he said, God, tell me when I'm going to die. And God says, I'm not going to reveal that to you. He says, well, what do you mean? He goes, it doesn't work that way. Begs him. God is begged by David, tell me at least the day of the week I'm going to die. And God finally concedes, and he says, you're going to pass away on Shabbat. Now, King David said, hold on a minute. I don't want to die. If I study Torah from the beginning of Shabbat to the end of Shabbat, it is said that the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, cannot get to me. And he studied and he studied. Every Shabbat, from the second the Shabbat candles were lit to the second the Havdalah was made. And he made it through. However, he had to celebrate every Shabbat after Shabbat was over. And that was called Su'udat David, or the Belava Malka, the celebration of King David. Well, let's hear about this week's Haftarah. So we mentioned it happened in the city of Jerusalem about 3,000 years ago. And now David is speaking to his son Solomon. So David's days are coming close to an end. And now he commands his son, Shlomo, listen to me. You've been made king of the greatest nation of the world at that time. You must listen to what God asked us to do. You have to listen and keep and inspire the people of Israel to keep the Torah. And that v'chazakta v'hayita le'ish. And that this Torah, this ethical monotheism is going to turn you into a man. You'll know what's right. You'll be able to judge people. We'll hear about that at another time. So he says, listen to what God said. In order to fulfill your throne, you have to keep in the right way. Now, David is 70. His son is about 12. Barely a teenager. Look what happens. He commands his son to kill Yoav ben Tzruya. Yoav was the commander-in-chief of David's army, and Yoav had killed Avner, which was Shaul's general, and also Amasa, which was Avner's general. So now, look what Shlomo has to do. Then, he also tells him, by the way, when I was in trouble, this man looked after me. His name was Barzillai Hagiladi. And these children of Barzillai, they must have a place at the king's table. You must look after these people. They took care of me. I want them to be taken care of. And then he goes back to telling Shlomo that you have to kill Shimi ben Gera. Now Shimi joined with Avshalom against David, Avshalom against David, his father. So now David is saying, you got to deal with this guy. And then now, in a very brief Haftarah, it says, Vayishkav David im Avotav, that he was distracted by the Malach HaMavet, and he left learning for a second or two, and the angel got to him. So anyway, he was buried it says in Ir David, in the city of David, probably just outside of it, in the Silwan caves that you can see when you take a tour of Ir David. V'hayamim Hashem alach David al Yisrael 40 shana. And David ruled the nation of Israel for 40 years, 7 of them in Hebron, and 33 in the city of Jerusalem. Ushlomo yashav al kisei David aviv. The throne is never left empty, and Solomon sits in the throne of King David. Vatikon machuto ma'od, and his kingdom is established very firmly. And then the last pasuk in the chapter that this comes from the book of Kings, it says V'hamlachan nachona b'yad Shlomo, and that the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So this is it. I hope you get to enjoy the Haftarah, and it is important for each and every one of us to do our part as far as Jewish continuity. And you don't have to be Jewish. You have to establish continuity, that our children have to hear these great stories about how we should behave to each other and how we should look after each other. And in that merit, we'll have kids that take care of us, and then they pass it on to the next person. Shabbat Shalom, enjoy the Haftarah. Thank you.